Hey, welcome back, folks. Wanted to take a look at the trade market, the players' value in the trade market, and specifically wanted to look at some of the Knicks players' value in the trade market. And so we wanted to look at Julius Randle, Obi Toppin, RJ Barrett, and also wanted to look at Kemba Walker because that was a little interesting how we gave up first round pick just to move Kemba Walker. So we'll take a look at that to see if there was something else there, why it was a curious move that they made. And but mostly we want to focus on Julius Randle first, Obi Toppin, and then RJ Barry. We want to look at their values in each trade market. And so here we have the trade market for players in protected and also unprotected picks markets. And so this here to the left hand side from 11.9 to 12.6, these are players that went for protected picks, and everyone from 10.1 to 13.3 went for unprotected picks. So the 11.9, essentially, we start with CJ McCollum. He went for one protected. Levert 9.8 was one protected. Cam Reddish 7.9, one protected. D'Angelo Russell was 12.5, it was one protected. Markel Fultz 6.9, one protected. Nikola Mirotic was 13.0 and was one protected. Blake Griffin had a PIE of 14.4 for one protected. Jeremy Grant 5.8 for one protected. Kyle Korver 8.1 for one protected. Bulhan Bogdanovic 9.1 for one protected. And Nerlens Noel was 12.6 and he went for one protected, right? So that's a protected market. And so real quick, the thing that's really interesting about the protected market is if you look at CJ McCollum, someone like a CJ McCollum, he went for one protected and his PIE was 11.9, pretty high salary, and he still went for um, one protected first round pick. Now CJ McCollum, he is a guard. He did have quite an impact once he went to New Orleans, and so New Orleans was a very good fit for him, and so it was an instant impact right away. And the other thing that was interesting of note to look at is if you look at Cam Reddish, Markel Fultz, and Jeremy Grant, these guys went for one protected, although the PIE was extremely low. But at these points, these guys were basically really young players that weren't really getting the amount of minutes, but a lot of other teams felt like there was a lot of talent there, and it's just a matter of unlocking that talent. And so if you kind of move forward, if you look at Jeremy Grant, he was only 5.8 in 2017. His PI was only 5.8. He went for one protected in 2017. And you fast forward to today, he's a very productive player. And honestly, if you had to trade Jeremy Grant right now, for most teams that needed a power forward, especially if it's a team that's in the playoffs right now or that's fighting for a playoff spot, that wants to take that next step, I could make the case Jeremy Grant right now will go for at least one unprotected pick, right? Because he's a much different player today. He's a lot more, he's a much better player and a much more productive player. So let's just see if we can take a quick look at Jeremy Grant, his PIE. Sorry, yep, I spelled that wrong. Excuse me. And so right now his PIE is he's averaging 19 points per game. PIE is only 11.2, so that's really interesting. This year doesn't have the stats. Let's go to stats. Regular season per game mode. This is going to take a few minutes. But in the meantime, I guess we can. Okay, yeah, it came up. So he only shot 40, almost 43%. Last year he shot 43%. So his efficiency has gone down he went down when he went to Detroit. But when he was in Detroit, there was more of a load on him, right? He was basically the man, and that's why he went there, right? He went there to be the number one option. As you see, his point production almost doubled, really went up drastically. However, as he became the man, his efficiency went way down, and so I mean that's no surprise. A lot of times, it happens a lot to a lot of these players, and so it is, it is what it is. And so, but the whole point is that I was trying to make these guys were very talented, and although the PIEs were really low, teams were willing to basically give up a protected pick just to pick them up, right? And then you have kind of specialized players like This here, this 8.1 is Kakova and the 9.1 is Bohan Bogdanovic. These are specialized shooters, and they basically spread the floor for teams, and so that's why teams were willing to give up. Although it's a protected first round pick, they were willing to give up a protected first for these players because they provide very important tool for their teams. Now, when we get over to the unprotected pick market, we just want to highlight a couple of things that we saw here. So if we see here, there's a 17.4 here for four unprotected picks. This was James Harden when he went to the Nets. At this point, James Harden was essentially considered a MVP candidate when he was with the Rockets. Even when he got after he got traded to the Nets, he was still considered an MVP candidate. And his on top of that, his PIE was really high, and so he went for four unprotected. In contrast, if you look here, this 17.8 was DeMarcus Cousins, right? DeMarcus Cousins went for only one unprotected, although he had the highest PIE in this whole market that we're looking at here. And the reason why that is a big men don't have they have a lot of their play impact efficiency tends to be high. Their PER also tends to be really high as well. However, their ability to actually have really good command and control over their offense is not that great. So if you look at their performance and compare it to the team's performance, there's not a strong relationship between both. But if you look at James Harden, although he has a smaller PIE, you look at his performance versus the team's performance. I would bet there's a strong relationship between both because he makes players for his teammates and for himself. And so it's just like when you have players like that have high assist ratios, average a decent amount of rebounds, and average a lot of points, they tend to have a very good relationship between there tend to be a very good relationship between your performance and the team's performance. If you look at the when we looked at that the same data for Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell, his PIE I think was only 13.5, and yet the relationship between his performance and his team's performance was also really high, right? And so and so that kind of shows you, I guess the point I'm trying to make is when it's a wing or a guard, they tend to have a better control over their team's offense. And so because of that, they would tend to be more valuable. Teams find them more valuable than like big men, right? Although the big men tend to have a higher PIE or higher PER or even have overall more production than let's say a guard or a wing, right? So although that may be the case, the guards and the wings tend to have a higher impact on the team's ability to win ball games. There tends to be a higher relationship between their performance and the team's performance. So I just kind of wanted to highlight that there. Then the other thing I wanted to kind of take an interesting look at was if you look at there's Derek White, Aaron Gordon, then you have Tobias Harris, Kristaps Porzingis. These guys at the time, I think they were around 25 or under 25 then when they were traded, and unprotected picks, and the PIU ranged from 9.6 to 12.5, right? And so that's kind of, I just wanted to highlight that real quick. Um, then now we want to take a look at Julius Randle's PIE and try to see where he fits in all of this, right? And so let's look up Julius Randle. Give me 1 second, folks. So we're going Julius Randle. Julius Randle's 12.8 PIE, average 20 points per game. The reason why his PIE is as low as it is, although he's averaging 20 points, is because of the efficiency. This is a player impact efficiency, I think they call it, right? And so that's the reason why it's as low as it is. It's just his efficiency is a little too low. So it takes into account. So what it does, it takes into account the amount of your field goals made versus the field goals that you took, right? Yeah. So basically, I think what it does, it adds the point, it adds the field goal made, then it subtracts the field goal attempts, right? I think that's what it does. And so basically, that's how it kind of brings all this into line. So if it didn't take into account your efficiency, then his PIE would be like, you know, really high, right? A lot of players' PIE would be extremely high, but because it takes into account, it subtracts the amount of attempts that you take from the from these stats, the calculation. it brings this down. And so that's what's kind of dragging his PIE down a little bit. And so, but if we go back and take a look at uh, like the picks market, that's where you kind of see players like that. Uh, is where, let's say there's an issue, there's something wrong with the perception of the player, right? There's something that's kind of like that kind of plagues the player a little bit, where there's a perception about them where the team feels like, or other teams feel like, oh, he's not going to be as valuable, or uh, because of whatever issue. And so Julius Randle, his issue was number one is the efficiency, and then the other issue is his attitude last year, the way he played last year. But we're going to take a look at his PIE versus the rest of these guys. So McCollum was 11.9. Julius is at 12.8, right? McCollum went for one protected pick, right? And then what player that's kind of similar? We're going to look at Nikola Mirotic. Mirotic, he has his PIE is 13, right? And he went for one protected. Blake Griffin was 14.4, went for one protected, right? And so I think these are the guys that got traded the last few years that you can actually compare to Julius Randle. So the only one that had uh, much higher PIE than he did was Blake Griffin, right? But the difference with Julius Randle and these players is because Julius Randle, if you guys remember 2 years ago, um, the relationship between his performance and the team's performance was really high. It was actually pretty high up there. I think it was 0.72 or 0.73 at the time. And the only other, that was basically um, he was basically there with players like Donovan Mitchell always had a pretty high relationship between. There was a high relationship between his performance and the team's performance. Nikola Jokic is another player like that. Uh, but that's usually meant for players like where basically they're the primary uh, uh, focus on the offense for the team, right? And that's usually when that happens, where there's not a ton of other options. These guys are basically creating plays for themselves and also for other teams. And so the offense tend to run through these players, and they're basically the primary offense. There's not a lot of variety. There's not a lot of options in terms of playmaking on the team, right? And so that's why Julius Randle's performance was highly correlated with the team's performance a couple of seasons ago. But these other guys here, that's not the case. McCollum, that could be the case with him because he's a guard, right? And he is a pretty good playmaker. But he played with another guard who basically did in Damian Lillard, and so he wasn't like the primary and the only playmaker for the team. So you're not going to see a high correlation between his performance and the team's performance, although he's capable of that. But you look at the PIE, we're just looking at the PIE versus the number of protected picks that was received players. And so Julius Randle, I think you can get one protected pick for him because he falls in line with these players. Blake Griffin, Blake Griffin's PIE was 14.4, much higher than Julius, but there wasn't a strong correlation between his performance and the team's performance when he was with Detroit, right? And then the thing that's even crazy about it too was, he was basically he was in Detroit for the most part, right? So, but the correlation really wasn't there, and they didn't do really well. Detroit really didn't do well after they received Blake Griffin either. And he still, Detroit basically sent one protected pick for him. And even after that, Detroit ended up like just releasing him after a few years because he just had a lot of injury problems, right? And so that's why I think if we trade Julius Randle, I think we can actually get one protected pick from him. I don't think we need to send a pick for him. And I think some of these trades are a good baseline for what you can get for Julius Randle. Now, I think, there are perceptions that we need to send a first round pick for Julius because of um, play last year and basically the attitude he had. And basically, there's just a lot of bad perceptions around Julius. Up to the front office to basically push those perceptions aside and just basically convince offices because these front offices they know that as well. They know Julius is a productive player, right? Given if you put him in the right situation, they can benefit from it, right? But they're going to basically use that perception to drag his value down, and it's up to basically push that aside and say, hey, let's put all this nonsense aside and just go down to the brass tacks and look at the stats and to show so we can figure out the value for this player. So that's why I think Julius Randle can return us so one protected pick, or at least if you don't think you can get a protected pick, maybe find a player where you can just swap players. It could be an expiring contract or something. And so that's just what I think for Julius Randle. Now, the next player I wanted to look at was Obi Toppin. Obi Toppin's PIE was 12.9. So that was really interesting to see, right? Obi Toppin, he's different, right? He's in a different market, right? In my opinion, Obi Toppin is really in the unprotected picks market. He's not in the protected picks market. And the reason why he's in the unprotected picks market is you have to compare him to like Derek White, right? Aaron Gordon, who else? Tobias Harris, right? And Kristaps Porzingis. Now the difference between Obi Toppin and these guys were getting when they were traded at these points, they were getting more minutes than Obi Toppin, right? But if you look at their PIE, Obi Toppin basically is basically had on average had a higher PIE than these four players here. The only person who had a higher PIE than he did was Tobias Harris, and at this point, Tobias Harris was already, was he averaging like eight, maybe 18, in 2019, he was probably averaging like 17, 18 points per game, averaging like 30 minutes per game. So he was getting the minutes, and yet Obi Toppin was still had basically the same PIE as he had, and you kind of compare yourselves in terms. You kind of compare the talent, and he has the athleticism as these guys have for the most part. He's got the physical tools that they have. In terms of he's got some above average NBA physical tools. Aaron Gordon has above average NBA physical tools. Chris South has above average NBA physical tools. So you can say he's kind of on average with these guys, or maybe slightly above average because he just got the athleticism. But the other thing he also has, if you watch a lot of the game, he can actually create his own points. Kristaps can create his own points as well. So can Tobias Harris, but so can Obi. But Obi, people don't realize Obi can actually create his own points as well. He can put the ball on the floor. He can finish through traffic very well. If you look at compare him to all these guys, I would say maybe it's him and I think he finishes. He's a better finisher than all these guys, especially in the paint or at the rim. Maybe Kristaps is the only one who might be a better finisher in the paint or above the rim at the rim than Obi Toppin. And so you're kind of looking at all of that. You're looking at the PIE, right? If you just want to say PIE uh, um, versus first round picks unprotected, um, you can say Obi can fetch one to two unprotected picks. I think thinking optimistically, he can definitely fetch two unprotected picks because, like I said, his PIE is 12.9 and he barely gets any burn, right? And he has the physical tools, right? Now, if his PIE was really low, he wasn't getting much burn, and then you might see him in a protected picks market, but because his PIE is high, because he has a high PIE, and he's getting a ton of minutes. I mean, it's I think he belongs in his I think you can find teams that'll be willing to give up one, even maybe two unprotected picks for him. The other person I wanted to look at was RJ Barrett. Um, Take a look at his PIE versus players that were traded. Now his PIE is much lower, it's 9.9, although he averaged 20 points per game. That's because his efficiency was just really extremely low, right? It's That was just a problem with RJ Barrett, but you can still compare him with the same players here, right? Who else can we add to? Maybe Eric Bledsoe, include Eric Bledsoe in there, but Eric Bledsoe at this point by 2018 was pretty much a veteran, and he went for two unprotected, right? So yeah, I mean it's with RJ Barrett, although his is lower, is 9.9. I mean he's averaging 20 points per game, although it's an extremely low efficiency. Um, I think RJ Barrett, you can basically, it's the same thing. He can go anywhere from one to two. 1 to 2 unprotected pick, depending on the team that you're looking at and how much that team believes in RJ Barrett, right? What they think they can do with RJ Barrett. But yeah, RJ Barrett also, I think, goes between 1 and 2 unprotected pick. So a lot of times people believe that the New York Knicks are always, overvaluing their, the reason why I'm doing this is because, a lot of analysts and people think we always overvalue our players. And in a lot of sense, we do overvalue our players, right? But this is just a way to try to look at it objectively to see basically what value can these get. And the reason why I also wanted to talk about these values is because we're in a situation now where we're trying to play trade for Donovan Mitchell. And so if we're trading for Donovan Mitchell, right, and these guys are basically coming up in trade talks, this is a very good way to kind of evaluate what these guys can return in a trade. Like we want to look at them isolated, right? You don't want to look at them like, okay, if you're trading Donovan Mitchell, if you're trading these guys for Donovan Mitchell, I think the first thing they want to do is kind of look at them in isolation. Like let's say, look at them in a vacuum in a trade market, putting aside Donovan Mitchell, right? Like what do you think these guys return? Looking at the previous trade that's made that the lead made, like teams made for similar players, right? And so, and looking at it, these guys are can return some, can return some first round picks for us. So Julius Randle, he's not going to be, from all we've heard, he's not going to be in the Donovan Mitchell trade. There's no way he's going to be in here, even if the trade happens. But if you wanted to do move Julius Randle, so you can give Obi Top, don't have to give up a first round pick to move Julius Randle. Obi Toppin, if he's come up in his Donovan Mitchell trade. And so you have to ask yourself before you include Obi Toppin in this trade, right? Let's say you decide to include Obi in the trade. Obi Toppin is worth, according to this, is worth 1 to 2 unprotected picks. Now, if you trade you trade him to the Utah Jazz for 3 unprotected and Obi Toppin. I mean, that could be equivalent to trading basically giving up 4 to 5 unprotected for Donovan Mitchell. That's pretty much what it's equivalent to, right? And so you have to look at it like that. Same thing for RJ Barrett. And so that's where, if you're talking about 3 unprotected, honestly, 3 unprotected, you don't want to send any of these. You don't want to send any of your good young guys, right? Maybe, Cam Reddish, because you gave up a protected for Cam Reddish. You gave up a first round bust with Kevin Knox and a protected first round pick for Cam Reddish. So maybe you can give up a Cam Reddish. Plus, Cam Reddish has a lot of injury issues, right? We don't know if he can stay healthy. I'm a huge Cam Reddish fan. If he's healthy, if I know he could be healthy, he's probably one of the players I would not even want to trade. Honestly, I don't want to trade any of our young players. I want to kind of really see what we have in these guys, try to rock out with them, to tell you the truth. However, if I had to, gun to my head, if I had to let one go, especially if you gave up 3 unprotected picks, maybe Cam Reddish, but I wouldn't. In my opinion, I would not give up 3 unprotected picks plus any of the young guys. It's just too much. You're paying too much at that point, especially for Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell commands only 2 unprotected. He does not command commands 2 unprotected and some maybe some bench fillers. Like, you can, for especially you're sending over Fournier as well. If you're sending over Fournier is an above, kind of like an average to above average NBA player. So that's actually more than good enough. You kind of have to look at these things in terms of talent. You can't just look at it in the valley like, oh, we don't like this guy. We're trying to get rid of him anyway. You kind of have to look at these guys and what value they actually have. And so, again, if you're trading 3 unprotected, I wouldn't even include Obi Toppin in that, any of the young guys. If you're putting in 3 unprotected to Utah Jazz, I wouldn't include Obi. I wouldn't even include RJ. If you're talking about 2 unprotected, maybe maybe if you had to give up Obi, maybe, but I still wouldn't do it, right? And so that's kind of how I feel about that. And then and yeah, and so even if Obi doesn't go in the Donovan Mitchell trade, right? And let's say we need to move someone between Obi and Julius Randle. To move someone, if you're looking at you want to get the most value back, unfortunately, it still would be. It was still, in my opinion, it still would be Julius Randle. And the reason why I say Julius Randle because I still feel like Obi Toppin is going to provide more value to the team going forward than Julius would. However, if you're talking about in a vacuum, you're just talking about you're not including like the value you're going to get from the player on this team. I would say probably Obi Toppin because I really think Obi Toppin can get you 1 to 2 unprotected picks in the market. If you had to trade one of them, and it's something that's really sad and unfortunate to say, but right now you have to trade one of them without thinking about what you get, what performance, how it impacts your team's performance in the future. I guess you would have to say Obi. And it depends with the team too, right? What team is giving you the two unprotected picks or the one unprotected pick for Obi Toppin? But yeah, him and RJ are probably the two most valuable players we have in the trade market. And same thing with RJ. It's like if you had to trade one of the three, or actually in a situation where you would like if you had to trade between, let's say you got Donovan Mitchell and you had to trade RJ or Julius, because at that point you might be looking at trading one of the two, right? Because both of them are high vol. Right now, they play well, but they like to have the ball in their hand, and so these guys that need the ball in their hands, you have four guys that need the ball in their hands, and so it doesn't seem like it would work. So there's a chance you may have to decide to trade one of them. And so the crazy part is like it's if you're deciding to trade between RJ and Julius, RJ is probably, and I'm talking about like you're not looking at the team's performance going forward. And it's a dumb way to look at it. Actually, you should be looking at like the team's performance going forward. You need to weigh that versus like the that you're going to get, right? What impact are those picks going to have on your team going forward? If you feel like you're going to be able to flip those picks for like let's say another star, then okay, I get it, right? But so if you're talking about RJ versus Julius, it's going to be RJ, right? RJ is going to command more. Is probably going to command 1 to 2 unprotected picks in the trade market, and more likely is going to be one because the PIE is so low. Um, it could be. I don't know. It could be 1 to 2. I'm not gonna basically try to make a prediction whether if it's gonna be one or two, like a definite number. But I'm just gonna say it's gonna be 1 to 2 unprotected picks that he commands. And you're between him and Julius, and you're just looking at the picks. You probably trade RJ to get the unprotected picks. And so looking at the three players, RJ is basically the most valuable in the trade market. Is basically is the two is basically RJ and Obi, and then you have Julius. Julius commands basically a one protected pick in the trade market. And so that's pretty much where we stand with this, with the Knicks, the value of these players. And the other one thing I wanted to talk about was the Kemba Walker. That was very interesting. Kemba Walker, his PIE is about 9.8, 9 sent away a first round pick to trade Kemba Walker to Detroit. That made no sense to me at all. That still doesn't make any sense because Kemba Walker's PIE is 9.9. The contract wasn't burdensome. So it's almost like I could not understand. So you're telling me you could not trade away Kemba Walker for like less, even like a second round pick or rights to some other player, an international player. You had to send a first round pick for. So that was very fishy to me. Like the reason why that was kind of fishy to me was like it just didn't make any sense, right? Even I'm not the only one who said that. Uh, it kind of made me wonder because I know Detroit was in the market for Mitch Robinson. So I'm wondering if Detroit was actually real competition and if they were actually going to lose Detroit, and they probably had some kind of like backdoor or some kind of deal, um, you know, kind of like verbal or like gentleman's agreement where okay, you guys leave Mitchell Robinson alone. The Knicks keep Mitchell Robinson. At the same time, we'll basically route that player, Jalen Duren, because if you guys remember, we routed Jalen Duren to Detroit, right? And so I'm wondering if that was kind of like all agreed upon, right? And it was all a part of like because Mitchell Robinson, from what I've heard, Detroit was looking to get wanted Mitchell Robinson, and so this might have been basically a way to kind of like say, okay, if you guys just leave Mitchell Robinson alone and keep him to us, help you guys get everything you need, right, and through this draft, in order to fill that the hole they had in the front court. And so that was really interesting to me because it didn't make any sense. His contract wasn't burdensome. And PIE's 9.9. The only issue was he was very injured. You can't really play him more than 15 to 20 minutes a game if you wanted to be able to play any number of games in a season. And so that was the only issue with Kemba Walker. So it's almost like you tell me you couldn't actually, let's say, flip him to like, let's say, a playoff team that needed a really good point guard play, especially like that one that needs only backup minutes, that needs only consistent 15 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes a game, right? Not even 20 minutes. If you have a 15-minute need for a backup point guard and you have a really good point guard that's going to be 30 to 35 minutes, I mean, Kemba Walker can fill that role. And there's a lot of teams that would have needed that because he's a very competent guard, especially like if you're talking about like also um, you know, for bench role, because he's not going to get abused by like, there's not a lot of, extremely talented bench point guards that's going to really abuse Kemba Walker. So it's perfect. That would be a perfect role. And so I thought Kemba Walker would have been an easy flip. So I think that's why I feel like there was something funny going on there with the Knicks and the Detroit Pistons for them to give a first round pick to Detroit uh, along with Kemba Walker. Yo, that's pretty much what I have, guys. Let me know what you think about the Knicks, these players in the trade value. What do you think? Who do you think is the most valuable in the trade market? What do you guys think about Julius Randle? Yeah, according to this, to me it shows that they don't need to send a first round pick. They should be receiving a protected first for Julius Randle according to these stats. Um, However, let me know what you think. Is this, like I'm not gonna say, do you feel it's a pipe dream? Like, make your case. Thank you so much. Comment below. I'll be more than happy to respond to your comments. Have a good day.